Hi and welcome to this week's video. This week we're looking at continuing from the last video I put up, which was Beginner's Improvisation Techniques Part 1. In that video we took a look at the two strongest notes of the scale, which are the root note and the fifth note. And this week we're going to go a little bit deeper. So don't forget, you rockabilly players out there, all of this stuff is relevant. I know we're doing most things in a swing style and we're doing most things pizzicato, but that's a good way to learn your theory. As soon as you understand all of this and you know it, you can apply it to all of the rockabilly tunes that you play. And in future videos, I'm going to show you some improvisation using the rockabilly style as well. So in this week's video, we're going to focus on the key of E major. Now, everything you learn can be transposed and applied to all the other key signatures. But the reason I want to focus on one single key is because improvisation relies very heavily on you understanding a scale inside out. And to cover more than one key in one video might take us a few hours. So we're going to focus it on one key this week. And in a future video, I will cover one or two other keys, but everything will apply the same way. And it's just more about learning and understanding and absorbing each key, each scale, each set of chords, to give you the freedom to really become a good bass player and a good improviser in the future. So the first thing we're going to do in this video is we are going to learn to play a scale of E major. Now the reason we're going to learn this is because once you know that scale, you know all the notes you need to play an improvised bass line in the key of E major. As I said before, there are some exceptions, but these exceptions come in when you start getting into more intermediate and advanced levels. So we're just going to stick with this for today and really start to get a grip on different chords and keys and improvising around your basic notes. So your E major scale is basically picking out the notes in a major scale all the way up from one E to the next E at the top, and it sounds like this. So let's break that down. These are the notes that you'll find in that scale, in that order. So the first thing we need to know is where to find these notes. So let's look at the double bass. So we know so far we have an open E, an open A, an open D, and an open G. We're not going to go all the way up this time. We're just going to use one single octave, just to give you a little tool set of notes that you can use for improvising in this key. So the first note we've got is really, really simple, and that's your open E. And we're going to start down here at the bottom. So your open E, followed by your F sharp. Now your F sharp is the second fret. I know we don't use frets on a double bass, but just visualize that's where it would be. And that's here. Then your next note is your G sharp, which is all your fingers down, which would be your fourth fret. It's then followed by the open A, then a B, which is on that second fret again, first finger. Then we have a C sharp, followed by a D sharp, finishing off with an E. Let's play that through one more time. E, F sharp, G sharp, open A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. And that is your one octave scale in E major. So now you know that E major scale and you know the notes within the E major scale, the chords start to make a little bit more sense. So let's take a look at that 12-bar blues one more time. So we know that the chords in the 12-bar blues are chord number 1, chord number 4, and chord number 5. Those chords are E major, A major, and B7. Don't confuse the key with the chord. All of those chords sit within the key of E major. This entire 12-bar blues, the whole thing, is within the key of E major. The chords are all made up of notes within the key of E major. They're just different chords. So each key has its own set of chords that you use, and they'll all be slightly different. So let's break these chords down one by one. So chord number 1 is obviously the chord of E major, and that's an E major triad. So within that triad, you've got the first note of the scale, the third note of the scale, and the fifth note of the scale, which are E, G sharp, and B. And if you're playing along with a guitarist or a keyboard player or any other chordal instrument, you'll find that they play all those three notes at the same time to make the sound of an E major chord. But broken down, those are the three notes in that E major chord. So as we know from last time, the strongest notes are the first and the fifth, and you've also got in there the third, which is the third strongest note. The next chord, chord number 4, is the A major chord, and that chord has exactly the same three notes in its triad as you would have if you were playing the first chord in the key of A major. Don't get confused, this will all make sense, don't worry. So chord number 4 in the key of E major is A major, and A major triad is made up of the notes A, C sharp, and E. And you'll see on the bass that this is the same shape as when we played the chord of E. We've got the open string, fourth finger down, first finger, and in the A, open, fourth, and first here. And the last chord we have is chord number 5. Now chord number 5 is known as a B7, but we're not going to look at the 7 in this video. That's something we're going to cover in a future video. But it's just important for you to know that it is a B7. The main thing about the B7 that you need to know as a bass player is that the triad is just the same as a B major. The 7 is a bit different. It is not a major 7. That's a different kettle of fish, but we're not going to go into that today. This is going to be for a future video. So we're just going to stick with the B major triad for your bass improvising at this moment in time. And the B major triad is made up of the B, which is second finger, D sharp, and F sharp. We have second finger, first finger, all fingers. So now we've looked at all three chords that are featured in this 12-bar blues and each of the notes that are featured within the triad of the chord. So in part 1 of this video, in the exercises, we use the root and the fifth notes of these chords to create a little bass line. This week we're going to add the third. So we've just learnt the chords, you know what the third is, that's in there with the chords, and we're going to start adding that to our bass lines. That third note is a really important note within that chord because it is the difference between a major chord and a minor chord. If you just play the root and the fifth of a chord, it's really strong, really nice cadence, but you can play that root and fifth over a major or a minor because the notes are exactly the same. The difference comes when you add that third. That third is the first strongest note that will change in between a major and a minor. It's a very, very important note, and it's a nice one to add into your bass lines. So exercise number 1, we're going to call Finding the Third. What we're going to do is we're going to open up our track on iReal Pro. If you haven't heard of the iReal Pro app yet, first of all, you need to go back to my earlier videos and catch up. And secondly, you can click on the link in the description of this video. That contains a link to download the iReal Pro app. There is a cost, but it's only a one-off. And it also contains which track to use and the tempo that I'm using to play along to this track at the moment. So to follow along to this exercise, all we're going to do is we're going to pick out the third note of each chord. So if we're in chord number 1, that third note is going to be a G sharp. If we are in chord number 4, that third note is going to be a C sharp. And if we're in chord number 5, that third note is going to be a D sharp. And we're just going to pick those out on the first note of the bar to get you used to finding where that third is. It is going to sound a little unusual. The third note is not traditionally used at the beginning of a bar. This is just an exercise to help us understand and find that third so we can then use it much more freely in future. So exercise number 2, now we know where the root, the third and the fifth notes are, we're just going to mix them up a little bit. So I'm going to give you an example of what it would sound like, but you can mix them up in any order you choose. It's really important to most often play the root note at the beginning of a bar, especially when the chord changes. Because as a bass player, your job is to provide a foundation for the instrumentalists and the soloists and the singer. So that root note is a really strong sort of homing note, and you need to provide that as a bass player. But it doesn't stop you improvising. So we have 4 bars of E, so we can play around with the notes. If we start with the E on bar number 1, we could then choose a 5th, and a 3rd, and a 5th. And then when it moves to A, make sure you have your A on the first one, and the E back on the first one. There are some exceptions, you can play around with this, but be very, very careful when you do. We're going to start doing this 1 note to each bar. We're then going to move on to doing the same exercise 2 to the bar. We're then going to finish the same exercise on 4 to the bar. When you're doing this exercise, take it slowly. Get really, really, really comfortable doing just 1 note to each bar to start off with. Mix it up. Put your 3rds in there, put your 5ths in there. Don't be afraid of when you're practicing to put 3rds at the beginning of a bar and 5ths at the beginning of a bar, but be very aware that you wouldn't usually do that in a live situation. When you're really comfortable with 1 to the bar, then go 2 to the bar, and then really play with that. And again, be really super comfortable with it before you move on to 4 to the bar. So next week, we're going to take an even deeper look at working with the improvisation in the key of E major. We're going to work on filling in the gaps between the 1st, 3rds and 5ths, and we're going to look at approaching each of those notes from different directions to create really nice walking bass lines that you can improvise with over a 12-bar blues. And then the following week, we're going to take that principle and we're going to look at the keys of A major and D major and look at the scales and working with those same principles and those same exercises in those further 2 keys. If anyone's feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all this information and all these talks of keys and chords and all this kind of stuff, just stick with it. It is a little overwhelming at first, but the more we go through it, the more you watch the videos, the more you practice these things, the more it will just sink in. And one day, you'll get the light bulb moment, it'll click and everything will make much more sense. I promise. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's video. As I always say, if you have any questions or comments, please do drop it in the comments below. I'll reply to everything. If you've got any requests for future videos or anything you'd like to learn, please don't be afraid to ask. And don't forget to subscribe to the video, just click the button below, and also give me a little thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video. I've been the Bass Pixie, and I'll see you next time.